Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Ambassador Chas Freeman. Ambassador Freeman is a retired American diplomat and writer. Ambassador Freeman, welcome back to India and Global Left.
I'm glad to join you, Judge.
The American and the Iranian officials have met the Pakistani mediators already as we speak. Before we get deeper, if you could tell us your sense of what led to the ceasefire between the US and Iran.
Well, I think basically the problem in the talks illustrates what happened. Iran knows it did not win the war, but it knows the United States and Israel lost the war. The United States does not accept that it has been defeated. The administration, the Trump administration, is populated with people who foolishly believe that the outcome of war is decided by how many bombs you drop, not by the transformation of the pressure from military action into a political result. The two sides are in Islamabad with no meeting of the minds. They can't agree about what they agreed about. So that is essentially the issue. But if you stand back a bit, I mean, it's quite clear Iran has achieved some of its objectives. It has got sanctions relief. It has now doubled its income from oil since the war began, which is the opposite of what you might expect. It's now selling oil for $110, $120 a barrel, whereas it sold it at a discount from the world price for about $47 or so before the war. So that's one objective achieved. Another is that it has demonstrated through its fortitude, its ability to take punishment, that it is prepared to accept a very high price for maintaining its independence and national integrity. And third, it has seized control of the Strait of Hormuz, something that Iranian nationalists have talked about, but never really seriously contemplated. And it is in effect operating a toll road through the Strait of Hormuz, charging about $2 million, not in dollars, in Chinese currency or cryptocurrency, to any ship that it decides it should permit to transit the strait. The transit is limited to those countries or vessels associated with countries and with cargoes from or to countries that are not hostile to Iran. So in other words, Iran is deciding whether it should let its friends through, but it will not let its foes through. And this has put the world, including the countries in the region, in a real bind. They have to court Iran now if they wish to survive economically. So we see South Korea, Japan going to Tehran on bended knee because they're so dependent on Persian Gulf oil. We see countries like your own, India and Turkey, having worked out, and China, of course, having worked out arrangements with the Iranians to meet their requirements, pay the fee, and get through. All this was working quite well until Donald Trump's eruption of threats at Iran, which he believes brought Iran to the negotiating table. I don't think that's accurate. But when he did that and the ceasefire agreement, or I should say, make-believe ceasefire agreement emerged, because it isn't a ceasefire, it's a lull in the fighting only. it could be transformed into a ceasefire if the parties in the talks in Islamabad were serious, but I don't think they're prepared to compromise. Anyway, um, the the strait is essentially shut down now, and there have been um, many instances of collateral damage. I think one of the great sufferers from this has been India, which has lost the discount on Russian oil that it had. Of course, the Russians, as a result of the war now, do not have sanctions on their oil exports, but India is paying a very high price for oil, either from the Persian Gulf or from Russia. And the rest of the world is about to experience a shock wave as the ships that left the Gulf prior to the February 28th initiation of this war by Israel and the United States unload their cargoes, then there will be no further cargoes following them. So we're talking about oil prices, which are, what, about $110 a barrel or so now, going up to maybe $200 a barrel in fairly short order. All of this is to go back to who won, who lost, and why they're in Islamabad. On the American side, the midterm elections are coming up despite Trump's efforts to manipulate them or prevent them. And the price of gasoline at the pump is very important to American voters, and Trump's popularity is sinking. And really, that's all he cares about, the domestic political element. On the Iranian side, one can only imagine that getting Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, to Islamabad must have been involved very contentious arguments within the government. Hardliners are in charge. Their question is, what's in it for us? Why should we deal again with people who are known to be deceitful, incapable, amateurish, unable to deliver an agreement like Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner? They are in Islamabad with J.D. Vance, in my opinion, primarily to watch J.D. Vance and report on him to Donald Trump. At this point, the only person in the world who trusts either of them is Donald Trump. And in fact, Foreign Minister Araghchi of Iran asked the United States not to send them because they are toxic. So you can say also that if you look to a broader solution on this, that solution probably will have to be crafted between Iran and the Gulf Arab states, not just Oman, which is to engage in joint management of the Strait of Hormuz under an arrangement with Iran, but the others as well. Israel is not in this package, but Israel is in effect represented in Islamabad by Witkoff and Kushner, who are ardent Zionists and who will tend to Israeli interests. Who is not there? Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, the three countries that joined Pakistan in promoting a Chinese peace proposal or a set of principles, and who backed the Pakistani foreign minister in flying to Beijing and in his mediation efforts. So all that's happened so far, as we know, is that the two delegations have met Shehbaz Sharif, the Pakistani prime minister, separately. They're not going to meet directly. And I wish Pakistan good luck because I don't think there's any common ground at all in the positions of the two sides. So let me stop. I have not mentioned Lebanon, but let me do that actually before I stop, if I may. The importance of Lebanon to Iran is twofold. First, of course, Iran has been the traditional protector of Lebanon and the sponsor or the supporter of Hezbollah, a movement which grew out of opposition to the Israeli invasion and occupation of 1982. Um, and therefore, Iran is very inclined to do what it can to support Lebanon against Israeli aggression. But the other reason, the more important one, is that Iran has seen the Israeli aggression against Lebanon in two ways. First, it's an obvious attempt to sabotage the ceasefire, and Israel doesn't want a ceasefire. Israel wants to destroy Iran. Um, Second, more important for the Iranians, it's a test of whether the United States can, in fact, rein Israel in. And it appears that the White House is sufficiently eager to exit this war that they did two things. One of them, sending J.D. Vance, the vice president, to Islamabad as a symbol of their intent and seriousness of purpose. And second, put pressure on Israel to halt the invasion and aggression of Lebanon. It's still going on, by the way, but there is supposed to be some sort of meeting in Washington between the Lebanese government and the Israelis. The Lebanese government is not the master of its own house and has no power to disarm Hezbollah as Israel demands. And in fact, it would be anomalous indeed were Hezbollah to be disarmed as Israel invades and attempts to annex part of Lebanon. The Hezbollah will not do that. The Lebanese government cannot force them to do it. So the so-called negotiations in Washington are yet another performative act with no prospect of success. So I'm very pessimistic about how this is going to turn out. So I will end there, having gone on quite a bit.
You mentioned about the lack of common grounds for both the sides, and I've been thinking about this 15-point proposal put forward by the United States, which let's say can be summed up as maximalist U.S. demands on Iran. And the 10-point demand from the Iranian side, which of course are very reasonable, including end of sanctions and permanent peace, right to enrichment under NPT. But things like end of US bases can be read as quote unquote Iranian maximalist demands. Now, the very fact that Trump agreed to open up the negotiations based on the 10-point indicate that he is sort of desperate for the ceasefire or the end of the war. Now, of course, a lot of people should be thinking about whether it's a genuine attempt to arrive at a ceasefire and negotiation, or is it just another bluff to regroup and launch another attack, given what we've seen in the last 1 year since June and afterward? What's your sense of whether the US administration actually wants an end of the war, or is it just another bluff?
No, I think the administration definitely is desperate to end this war. They imagined it would be an in and out 4-day operation. They imagined all kinds of things which their own intelligence agencies told them were wrong. Their military told them were wrong, but they went ahead anyway. So I think the way to think of these negotiations is the war after the war. That is, the war is going on, but now it is going on at meetings in Islamabad, at least for the time being. So, of course, Clausewitz famously said that war is the continuation of policy by military means. I would say diplomacy is the continuation of war by rhetorical means at this point. So the real question is not whether the talks in Islamabad are going to end the war, because clearly they will not. The war will continue. The real question is whether the war resumes firings of missiles and so forth. That is, does it go kinetic? Iran apparently has quite a trove of usable missiles left. It's not out of them at all. The United States and Israel, on the other hand, have run out of interception capability. So we're in a strange position where each side can clobber the other. Neither side can defend against those clobberings. So what happens in this situation, usually I would say, is determined by what I call the balance of fervor. That is, how intensely committed you are to the objectives that are at stake in a war. And we've seen this balance of fervor work, for example, in Vietnam, where Vietnamese seriousness of purpose about reunifying the country was far stronger than the will of the United States to prevent that. So here, I think the balance of fervor is very definitely with Iran, and that should count for something. The wild card in this is Israel, because Israel's objective is, as it's demonstrating in Lebanon, to establish a greater Israel. And the principal, indeed the only real obstacle to that, has been Iran. So Israel's determination to destroy Iran is directly linked to its own vision of its future. And Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted to go down in history as the man who brought Greater Israel into existence. Greater Israel, in its farthest extension, is, of course, the entire expanse of territory between the Euphrates and the Nile. That is, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, parts of Saudi Arabia, and parts of Egypt, as well as Jordan, all under the control of Zionism. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but it remains a dream of conquest by Israel that is very real. Now, we are watching polls in Israel which suggest that many Israelis have had enough of this war. The war began with about 80% of Israelis supporting it. Now that's down to about 50%. Mr. Netanyahu has never been popular in all quarters. And it's very possible that the results of this war will be regime change, not in Iran, but in the United States and Israel, as Donald Trump loses authority and legitimacy with voters, and Benjamin Netanyahu finally meets defeat at the polls in Israel. So, of course, we don't know then what will happen in Israel, because the people around Netanyahu are essentially fascist fanatics, religious fanatics. And anyway, one other result of the unfortunate result of this war, of course, has been the complete trashing of international law. And we have seen that, the further evidence of that in the British sellout of the Chagos Islands decision, which is portrayed as ceding sovereignty to Mauritius, but was in fact a decision by the British government driven by legal reasoning and judicial pressure, which Britain has now brushed aside. So much for international law. It's ironic in that regard to hear American spokespeople speak of the control of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran as contrary to international law. So international law has been reduced to a pretense which you can bring forth to justify your position if it happens that it might have favored you, but which you otherwise ignore, and in fact, not just ignore, violate at will.
uh, if the Trump administration is desperate to end at least the kinetic component of the war, and I'm making a distinction based on what you spoke, the distinction between the war that has been going on for so long and the kinetic component of the war. If the Trump administration is desperate, then the question comes up is the relationship between the United States and Israel. Now, uh, from what I've been reading, it seemed to me that the sentiment in Israel as a whole is in favor of the war. You said that it is down to 50%. I haven't read that report. If does that report say that 50% doesn't want war, or does it say that 50% doesn't like the way in which Netanyahu is conducting the war? I'm not sure if you can clarify that, but my question is. How do you see the relationship between the Trump administration and the Zionists in Israel, or the Israel lobby, which includes the Zionists in the United States, going forward?
Well, I would characterize the U.S. Israeli relationship now as a marriage in which both sides would prefer divorce to continuation of the bond. But there are very many reasons why that is not easy. And um, on the Israeli side, Benjamin Netanyahu has talked about turning Israel into a sort of Sparta, a militarized society that has broken its bonds of dependence on the United States. This means he understands that he doesn't have the assured support of the United States anymore, even if he does have Donald Trump's support. On the American side, everything depends really on Donald Trump for several reasons. Of course, he has a base of about 1/3 of American voters who are followers of his personality cult and for whom he can do no wrong. So he has a margin built on the loyalty of that group, which prevents him from being impeached and otherwise removed from office. But he, in dealing with Israel, he's got two problems. One is, of course, that his principal donations have come from plutocratic Zionists. That is, he's dependent on the Zionist donor class for his continuation in politics. But second, and perhaps more important, there is obviously some sort of dirt in the Epstein files that has been successfully used to blackmail him. So he really can't move. I note that his wife, Melania, has separated herself from him on the Epstein file issue. And there are uh, um, to the extent that Donald Trump's base is evangelical Christian, the revelations of what he appears to have, or is rumored to have done with Epstein, could be quite devastating to him politically. So I think he's caught both from the donors and from the scandal of the Epstein issue. And so this means that divorce is not going to happen anytime.
I
You
wanted to
froze
ask
for a
you.
moment.
Yeah, as I said, my signal has been down today, but it seems to me now it's working again. I wanted to ask you about.
Well, when you
Go on.
go ahead.
Okay. Ambassador Freeman, I wanted to ask you about an article I read this morning on the New York Times by University of Chicago professor Robert Pape, who has argued that this war has transformed Iran to one of the four major powers. And his argument is that the control over the strait would give Iran the leverage over 20% of oil and natural gas. And if that is coupled with 11% of Russia's oil and gas and the Chinese ability to consume them, then it would bypass a significant amount of economic trade and other powers from the West. What is your response to that line of argument?
Well, I don't agree with him that Iran is emerged as one of the great powers in the same sense as China, the U.S., the Russian Federation, and potentially India. I mean, I don't see that. I think, however, that this is an illustration of something we've discussed before, namely the emerging multinodal order. And it illustrates, as the example of the Chinese control over rare earths does, the ability of a defense based on control of natural resources or geography. So it is true. I mean, I think he's got a serious point. As I mentioned earlier, people are going to Iran on bended knee, trying to work out arrangements for their energy supplies to be restored. And that Iran has the ability to determine whether their economies are sound or decaying. So we've seen Spain, for example, establish an embassy in Tehran. Spain clearly understanding that the world has changed. The Spanish prime minister has been in Beijing 4 times, I think, and is going again. But he's also reached out to Iran. So have the French. So have others. The Italians. It's not insignificant that the Sigonella base in Sicily, from which the United States operates in the Mediterranean, has been denied to us by the Italian government. So what we're seeing is, in military terms, or I should say power terms, not military, the denial of natural resource passageway, like the Strait of Hormuz, can in fact enable a middle-ranking power to checkmate a much greater power. In a way, we already saw this in Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, was buttressed by NATO retraining, re-equipment, and economic and other support against Russia. But the fact is, Russia is a vastly larger, more powerful country, and yet Ukraine has been able to stand it off. And it's done so not in the same way as Iran, but by participating in what is essentially a proxy war. So what we're seeing is a very new pattern of world order or international relations emerging as the power of the U.S. Navy by keeping it 500, 700 miles away from Iranian missiles, and because of the fact that it's vulnerable. So this has major implications. For example, we've just anymore without risking their destruction. And we've also seen a dramatic illustration of the limits of the use of force. There is no way to open the Strait of Hormuz except through diplomacy. And some countries, like your own, have used diplomacy to open it, at least in part. In the long run, this means, and again, to go back to the professor's thesis, that every country in the world that has an interest in the price of oil and gas is going to have to deal with Iran and try to make nice to Iran, if you will, whatever they may think of the Islamic Republic's internal politics. So again, I go back, I think Iran knows it has not won this war. It is at the negotiating table to win it. And the United States does not understand that we have lost this war. And we are there under the delusion that somehow we have a lot of leverage, which we don't have. Of course, I have to say that a lot of the messaging about this on both sides is directed at domestic audiences. Trump is determined to prove that he's a tough guy and he won the war and it wasn't a mistake and so forth. I think the limits of gullibility in the United States have, however, been transcended, and he won't be able to convince people of that. On the Iranian side, as I indicated, there has been not regime change, but regime consolidation around a hard line. Again, I think for Ghalibaf to go to Islamabad must have been quite contentious within the government and religious establishment in Tehran.
What would be the impact of this elevation of Iranian status? Certainly at the global level, but more definitively at the level of West Asia. And I'm thinking about the domestic nationalist politics up in several parts of the countries because since the Second World War, there have been nationalist movements or forces in this region of different varieties. And since the fall of the Soviet Union, at least, the idea was that if you could somehow be a vessel or seek blessing of the United States, then you can probably trade off a lot of undesired factors. Those things have gone for a toss. So I wonder, in the long history of West Asian national movement, what is your sense of the impact of this on the domestic politics?
In West Asia, starting with Israel, of course, Israeli strategy has involved its direct domination of the Palestinians and others in its immediate neighborhood. And it has also involved assuring that more powerful countries, more distant countries, are under American tutelage and therefore subject to manipulation indirectly by Israel. So that second element is now in jeopardy. Because Israel has learned that the United States, in fact, does not have the will to perform the protective role in the region that it once did. So U.S.-Israeli relations are on an uncertain trajectory. In Saudi Arabia, a major country, I think we've seen over the decades the Saudis seek multiple affirmations of different identities. There really wasn't any Saudi nationalism. The Saudis responded to pan-Arabist challenges by identifying themselves as religious. In other words, an affirmation of Islam rather than a nationality. Mohammed bin Salman, they've gone through various phases, but Mohammed about Saudi Arabia. And it's not any longer seen as a religious entity, but now as a nation. And I note that the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia has already called his counterpart in Tehran. So in the Gulf, I think the control of the Strait of Hormuz leaves the Gulf Arabs with no alternative but to swallow their anger, their distress, and in the long run, make peace with Iran. And that will require them to readjust their position in geopolitics. They will have to attenuate, if not remove, the American presence from their territory because it is subject to and it invites Iranian attack, and that reality cannot be overcome. So they have learned that the United States not only does not have the capacity to defend them, but doesn't have the will to defend them, does not assign to them the priority they believe they should enjoy. And here, too, I will mention another factor, which is not unimportant. We're talking about two countries, the United States and Saudi Arabia, which are essentially under the control of strongmen. And our strongman, Donald Trump, has said to Mohammed bin Salman, the strongman in Saudi Arabia, that he should kiss Trump's ass. To which Mohammed bin Salman reacted, apparently, by saying, "We're not buying any more American weapons." Now, whether he can do that or not is another issue, but the level of anger and distrust is at an all-time high. We have already seen the fissure of the Gulf Cooperation Council, with Oman basically agreeing with Iran to split the fees of tolls in the waterway. We don't know what the split is, but we do understand now that there has been some mining of the strait close to Oman, meaning that ships have to go close to Iran. And presumably they'll have to work that out. If you look to the long term, Iran has a big incentive to have good relations with the Gulf Arabs. And therefore, I think there's a basis for bargaining between them over whether the transit of oil from the Gulf Arabs through the Strait of Hormuz. I could see something like a major discount for countries in the Persian Gulf that had severed their relationship, their dependence on the United States, or broken the Abraham Accords, dropped out of them. Or it's even conceivable that the joint management of the strait that Iran has offered to Oman might be offered more widely. So if there is to be a long-term resolution of the control of the strait, which has emerged as the central issue for the global economy, it will have to be crafted locally. Now, there are also, of course, interested parties who might aid and abet the negotiation of a regional settlement of the control of the strait. And I'm thinking of China, India, and Europe, if there is a Europe. I mean, it depends on whether Europe exists or not as an actor. But all three of those great markets and societies have a strong stake in how the Strait of Hormuz is managed. So there will be an effort made to patch things up between Iran and the Gulf Arabs. That may have the support of external actors other than the United States. And we shall see what happens. But finally, the geopolitical status of Iran, as the good professor indicated from your alma mater, the University of Chicago, that he's correct. I mean, people will be flocking to Tehran. Tehran's influence globally has just skyrocketed. I don't think that makes it a global power, but it's certainly not unimportant.
My final question, Ambassador Freeman, is on Palestine, given this. It might be a bit far-fetched to say it all began with Operation Alaska Flood on October 7, but that was a massive point of rupture. And what we are seeing is indirectly or directly linked up with that. And many Palestinian scholars are now saying that all the attention that Palestine was getting has fizzled out because of the war with Iran, and that was probably Netanyahu's another goal of starting the war with Iran. We are not hearing as much in even in many alternative media about the death penalty law, about the expansion of 32 more settlements in the recent few days or weeks, the continued occupation of not just the occupied West Bank, but also Gaza, and the killings of Palestinians. So, my question to you is what could be the impact of this Iranian resistance on the resistance in Palestine?
Well, West Asian War, the war with Iran, which has now spread quite a bit through the region, um, is is a distraction, a diversion of attention from the underlying cause of instability in the region, which is Israeli expansionism and ethnic cleansing and denial of self-determination to Palestinians. There's no question about that. There's also no question that the war has been a useful distraction from the Epstein files, that it's been a useful distraction from the charges against Netanyahu of corruption and the opposition to him in Israel. He's a wartime prime minister. Um, as someone said, he wanted to be Churchill. He thought of Churchill in World War II, but he reenacted Churchill at Gallipoli. Um, anyway, it's been very uh, uh, it's what you mentioned, namely persuading the region that it can live with the indefinite confrontation between Palestinians and Israelis. But I don't think that is anything but a passing phase. I think the Palestinian issue has been recognized now by the entire Arab world, certainly, as the scenic solving it is this absolutely essential ingredient in any peace. Views of the United States and views of Israel have never been as negative as they are now. I think the United States is losing influence. Israel has lost acceptability, not just globally, but in the region. Countries like the United Arab Emirates, which practice realpolitik and recognized Israel and have stuck to that, will now be hard pressed. I mean, after his respond to public opinion is less Filipinos, and the native population is tribal and behind the rulers. They will have to, as practitioners of realpolitik, they will have to recognize the rearrangement of geopolitics and regional relationships that this war has produced. I mean, after all, war in the end is something you resort to when you cannot adjust relationships or policies by peaceful means. So war results in rearrangements, adjustments of relationships and territorial limits and other things. And the question then is, and this is what is confronted, or actually evaded, but rhetorically confronted performatively confronted in Islamabad. The real question is, how do you reconcile the parties to a conflict to the results of the conflict? We've learned, many of us knew, but we've been reminded constantly that wars do not end until the defeated admit defeat. We have nobody admitting defeat in this context. So I don't know. I don't think the Palestinians have admitted defeat, and I don't think that conflict is going to end. I don't think that the Arabs, there are. I should end by saying that as horrible as what has happened is, there are worse things that could happen. For example, uh, Ben Gvir wants to blow up the Al Aqsa Mosque, destroy it, in order to rebuild the alleged temple that was there. Uh, Something like that would energize the entire 2 billion Muslims in the world in a way they have not been energized. So Israel is and introduces all sorts of uncertainties. And at this point, of course, we have to remind ourselves we don't know whether at the end of the 2 week hiatus, Iran will resume bombarding Israel and vice versa. I think, the question on the American and Israeli side is that we're running out of munitions. And that for the United States is very debilitating because it deprives us of the ability to respond to all sorts of contingencies, whether they're in Taiwan or Korea or in Europe. The events that Donald Trump was persuaded by Benjamin Netanyahu to set in motion are having all kinds of domestic and international effects that some anticipated, but most didn't.
As you said, war leads to rearrangement. I was thinking about the last 500 years of map drawing, and a lot of geopolitical maps or political maps in the globe have been redrawn by wars in the last 500 years. We'll leave it there, Ambassador Freeman. Thank you so much for your time, and it's your morning, so have a wonderful rest of the day ahead.
Thank you, Jodish. Keep well.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.